a 911 call, a black teenager, and a mother who showed up just in time. But what happens when the truth lands harder than the accusation? The sun dipped low over Ridgewood Heights, casting long golden shadows across the pristine neighborhood. It was the kind of place where the lawns were always freshly mowed, the driveways perfectly sealed, and the sidewalks smooth without a single crack. Everything was quiet, too quiet. The only sounds were the distant bark of a dog and the low hum of a luxury SUV gliding through the cul-de-sac. Jamal Carter, a 16-year-old high school student, wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and adjusted the strap on his gym bag. His muscles ached from 2 grueling hours of basketball drills at Lincoln High. Normally, he'd take the bus home, but today, he decided to cut through Ridgewood Heights, a quicker route to his house. It wasn't unfamiliar territory. His best friend lived just a few blocks away, and he had walked this way before. But something about today felt different. Jamal kept his headphones in, blasting his favorite hip-hop playlist, drowning out the silence around him. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just walking, just heading home, just existing. But inside one of the pristine homes lining the street, Susan Whitmore watched. Susan had lived in Ridgewood Heights for 15 years. She knew every car, every jogger, every familiar face that passed her street. And this face, she didn't recognize. A teenage boy, black, tall, athletic build, a gym bag slung over his shoulder. Her stomach tightened. At first, she tried to ignore it. Maybe he was visiting someone. Maybe he was just passing through. But the doubts crept in, unrelenting. What if he was up to something? What if she saw his face on the news later that night, a suspect in a burglary just down the street? She tried to brush the thought away, but fear whispered in her ear, "Better safe than sorry." With a deep breath, Susan reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen, hesitating. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath. "He's just walking." But the fear was louder than reason. She dialed. 911, what's your emergency? Susan glanced through her window, heart pounding. Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood. She swallowed, gripping the phone a little tighter. And what exactly is he doing? The dispatcher's voice was calm, neutral. Susan hesitated. What was he doing? Nothing. But she couldn't say that. He's walking down my street, she said quickly. Looking around, like he's scoping out houses. I don't know who he is. And he's carrying a bag. A pause. Ma'am, is he engaging in any criminal activity? Susan's mouth went dry. Well, no. Not exactly, she admitted. But I've never seen him before. This is a quiet neighborhood. That was all it took. We'll send officers to check it out. Susan hung up, still watching as Jamal stopped briefly on the sidewalk, pulled out his phone, and switched his playlist. He had no idea what was coming. A few streets away, officers Mark Stevenson and Daniel Lopez were parked near a coffee shop when the call came through. Possible prowler. Ridgewood Heights. Male. Black. Mid-teens. Carrying a bag. Stevenson, a veteran cop with 15 years on the force, glanced at Lopez, the younger officer still learning the ropes. Let's check it out, Stevenson muttered, flipping on the cruiser's lights. The engine roared as they sped toward the neighborhood. Meanwhile, Jamal was just 2 blocks from home when he heard it. A sharp, piercing whoop of a police siren behind him. His heart skipped. He turned. A police cruiser pulled up fast, tires screeching as the doors flew open. "Hey! Stop right there!" The voice was sharp, commanding. Jamal froze, yanking out his headphones. The street around him blurred, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. 2 officers stepped out. Their hands hovered near their holsters. The air shifted. Jamal wasn't just a kid walking home anymore. He was a suspect. Officer Stevenson narrowed his eyes, taking in the gym bag slung over Jamal's shoulder. "What's in the bag?" His voice was clipped, demanding. Jamal blinked. My basketball gear." Lopez stepped closer. "Where you headed?" "Home," Jamal answered, trying to keep his voice steady, but his chest tightened. Stevenson scoffed. "That right? What's the address?" Jamal started to answer, but before he could, Lopez grabbed the bag. "Hey! That's my stuff." "Relax," Stevenson muttered, unzipping the bag. His rough hands rummaged through it, a pair of sneakers, a sweaty jersey, a water bottle. Nothing suspicious. But he wasn't done. "Why'd you cut through this neighborhood?" Jamal felt the knot in his stomach twist tighter. "It's a shortcut," he said. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Lopez looked at Stevenson, hesitating. Maybe he's telling the truth. Stevenson didn't budge. "Then why'd someone call the cops on him?" Jamal's breath caught. But before he could say another word, something changed. A sleek, black SUV rolled slowly toward them. It pulled up fast. The doors swung open. And out stepped Monica Carter, the mayor of Fairview, and Jamal's mother. The air around them shifted instantly. Officer Stevenson stiffened, recognition flashing in his eyes. He had seen Monica Carter on the news, at city meetings. But it took a moment for his brain to catch up. Lopez's eyes widened. Monica didn't run. She didn't panic. She walked. Deliberate. Controlled. Her heels clicked against the pavement, sharp like gunfire in the eerie silence. Jamal exhaled, relief washing over him. "Mom." She held up a hand. A silent message. "I got this." Stevenson cleared his throat. "We received a call about a suspicious person." Monica's eyes flashed. "Suspicious?" Lopez shifted, uncomfortable. "We stopped him to ask some questions. Needed to confirm if he actually lives here." Monica let out a slow, measured breath. Then she pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. Jamal's student ID. Their home address. A picture of the 2 of them at a community event just last month. Silence. Stevenson's jaw clenched. Monica's gaze didn't waver. "Tell me. Did you stop him because he was suspicious? Or because someone assumed he didn't belong? Neither officer had an answer. But Monica already knew. And standing frozen in her doorway, Susan Whitmore realized. She had just called the police on the mayor's son. Jamal Carter had no time to react before the police cruiser swerved to a sharp stop, its tires skidding slightly against the pristine pavement of Ridgewood Heights. The doors flew open, and before he could even process what was happening, two officers stepped out, hands near their holsters. "Hey! Stop right there." Jamal froze. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he yanked out his headphones, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. The air felt different now, charged, hostile. Officer Mark Stevenson, the older of the two, fixed him with a sharp gaze. His stance was rigid, authoritative. His partner, Officer Daniel Lopez, was slightly behind him, younger, less certain but still watching closely. Stevenson's eyes flicked to the gym bag slung over Jamal's shoulder. "What's in the bag?" His voice was clipped, demanding. Jamal blinked, caught off guard. My basketball gear." Lopez took a step closer, his presence looming. "Where you headed?" "Home," Jamal said, keeping his voice steady. But his chest tightened. He had seen this before. He knew this wasn't just a random stop. Stevenson's mouth curled slightly, something unreadable in his expression. "That right?" His tone dripped with doubt. "What's the address?" Jamal started to answer, but before he could, Lopez reached forward and grabbed the bag. "Hey! That's my stuff." Jamal's voice rose in protest, his muscles tensing as he instinctively stepped back. "Relax," Stevenson muttered, unzipping the bag. His hands rummaged through it, basketball sneakers, a sweaty jersey, a water bottle. Nothing suspicious. But he wasn't done. Stevenson's gaze lifted back to Jamal, eyes narrowing. "Why'd you cut through this neighborhood?" Jamal's stomach twisted. His pulse pounded. "It's just a shortcut," he said carefully. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Lopez shifted slightly, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Maybe he's telling the truth." Stevenson didn't budge. "Then why'd someone call the cops on him?" Jamal's mouth opened, but before he could form a response, something changed. Over Stevenson's shoulder, Jamal saw it. A sleek black SUV rolled slowly down the street, its tinted windows reflecting the setting sun. It pulled up fast, coming to a controlled but firm stop. The doors swung open. And out stepped Monica Carter, the mayor of Fairview. And Jamal's mother. The air itself seemed to shift as Monica Carter stepped onto the pavement. She wasn't just a mother, she was the most powerful woman in the city. Dressed in a sharp navy blazer and tailored slacks, she moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the concrete. She didn't run. She wasn't panicked. She was in control. Stevenson's posture stiffened the second he recognized her. He had seen her before, on the news, at press conferences. But it took him a moment to process the reality of the situation. Lopez was the first to find his voice. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. We're handling a situation." Monica didn't flinch. "Oh, I see that," she said smoothly, her voice even but sharp enough to cut through steel. "And what exactly is the situation?" Jamal exhaled, relief washing over him. "Mom." She held up a hand, a silent message. "I got this." Stevenson cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "We received a call about a suspicious person in the area." Monica's brow arched. "Suspicious?" Lopez gestured toward Jamal. "We stopped him to ask some questions. We needed to confirm if he actually lives here." Monica exhaled slowly, measuring her words. Then, with deliberate calm, she pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. On the screen, Jamal's student ID. Their home address. A picture of the two of them at a community event just last month. Silence. Lopez shifted uncomfortably. Stevenson's jaw tightened. Monica wasn't done. She took a step closer, her voice steady. "So tell me, did you stop him because he was suspicious, or because someone assumed he didn't belong?" Neither officer had an answer. But Monica already knew the truth. And standing frozen in her doorway, Susan Whitmore realized it too. Susan had recognized Monica the second she stepped out of the SUV. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. She had called the police on the mayor's son. She had called the police on a kid who was just walking home. And now, she stood there, watching as Monica Carter stared down two officers, demanding answers they couldn't give. What had she done? Her mind raced back to the phone call. The words she had said. "He looks suspicious. I don't know who he is." But now, staring at the young man standing beside his mother, she could see it. He wasn't a threat. He never was. Her face flushed hot, her breath shallow. She had been so sure. So certain she was doing the right thing. But she wasn't. And now she had to stand there and watch the truth unfold. Monica didn't take her eyes off the officers. Stevenson squared his shoulders, trying to salvage what was left of his authority. "We were just following procedure." Monica's head tilted slightly, her expression unreadable. "Procedure?" Lopez hesitated. "We got a call about a suspicious person." Monica took another measured step forward, her voice cutting through the thick air. "A teenage boy. Walking home." Neither officer had an answer. Jamal rubbed his hands together, still feeling the sting of being treated like a suspect in his own neighborhood. Finally, Monica turned, her eyes landing directly on Susan. Susan felt her stomach drop. The silence stretched. Monica didn't have to say it. The truth was already suffocating. This could have ended differently. And Susan knew it. She had called the police on the mayor's son. The realization hit Susan Whitmore like a freight train. She had picked up the phone, thinking she was being cautious, responsible, even. But now, standing on her front porch, she was watching the weight of her decision unfold in real time. Across from her, Monica Carter, Fairview's mayor, a woman who commanded rooms full of politicians and CEOs, was staring down two officers who suddenly had nothing to say. Officer Mark Stevenson squared his shoulders, his face carefully blank, but his stiff posture betrayed him. Officer Daniel Lopez, standing beside him, shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence replaced with doubt. But just because they had gone quiet didn't mean Monica was done talking. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her sharp gaze never leaving the officers. The air was heavy now, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what she would do next. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She didn't have to. Her voice, when it came, was steady. Precise. Cutting. You searched his bag. You questioned where he lived. You assumed he didn't belong. Stevenson lifted his chin slightly. We were just following procedure. Monica's head tilted, just barely. Procedure? Lopez exhaled sharply. We got a call about a suspicious person. Monica took another step forward, her tone unwavering. A teenage boy. Walking home. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Neither officer had an answer for that. Jamal Carter rubbed his hands together, still feeling the sting of being treated like a suspect in his own neighborhood. Monica turned then, finally looking away from the officers. Her gaze landed directly on Susan Whitmore. Susan froze. She knew this moment was coming. The second she had recognized Monica Carter, the moment she had pieced it all together, her stomach had dropped. Now, there was no escape. Was it you? The words weren't shouted. They weren't accusatory. But they might as well have been a thunderclap. Susan's mouth opened. Then shut. The weight of the moment crushed her. She didn't mean for this to happen. She never thought it would go this far. I'm not racist, she told herself, but the words felt hollow, even in her own mind. I was just being cautious. But now, standing there, watching as a mother, who had just left a government meeting, had to rush to her own neighborhood to defend her son against the police over nothing, she could see the truth for what it was. Monica's gaze never wavered. She wasn't letting her off the hook. I just thought. Monica's voice sliced through the air. You thought what? Susan had no answer, at least, not one that wouldn't make her sound exactly like the person she never wanted to believe she was. She looked down. Because she already knew. Do you know what could have happened here? Monica's voice wasn't raised, but it had weight. Susan swallowed, her throat tight. He could have. She couldn't even finish the sentence. But Monica did. He could have been tackled. Arrested. Slammed against a squad car for resisting. Or worse. The word settled like a stone in Susan's stomach. 15 years. She had lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. And in all that time, she had never once called the police on a teenage boy walking home. Until now. And why? Because the sight of a black teenager with a gym bag was enough to make her feel unsafe. Monica didn't need to say it out loud. Susan already knew. And the officers? They knew too. The tension was unbearable. Officer Stevenson shifted, clearly looking for an escape. If there's no issue here, we'll be on our way. Monica let out a sharp breath. that's it? Lopez hesitated. Look, we were just responding to a call. Monica shook her head, disappointment settling in her chest like lead. Yeah, she murmured. You were. She turned then, finally looking back at Jamal. Her gaze softened, her fury directed at everyone but him. She reached out, putting a gentle hand on his shoulder. Come on, baby. Let's go home. Jamal nodded, slung his bag over his shoulder, and followed her to the SUV. Stevenson and Lopez walked back to their squad car, muttering under their breath. And Susan? She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, watching them drive away. But for Jamal, for Monica, for every black family that has ever had to explain their existence in spaces they have every right to be in, this wasn't over. The car was quiet. Jamal sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. The flashing lights. The way they had searched his bag like he was a criminal. The way they had looked through him, not at him. It played over and over in his mind like a scene from a movie. Monica gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. She had known this moment would come eventually. She just hadn't expected it to come so soon. Jamal finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. What would have happened if you weren't there? Monica felt her stomach clench. She knew the answer. But it was an answer she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. Instead, she reached over, squeezing his hand. You did everything right. Jamal let out a slow breath. And it still didn't matter. Monica looked at him then, really looked at him. A 16-year-old kid. Still sweaty from basketball practice. Still carrying the weight of a moment that never should have happened. She knew this wasn't just about today. It was about every story like this. Every kid like him. Every parent like her. Who had to teach their children how to move in a world that saw them as a threat first, a person second. Back in Ridgewood Heights, Susan Whitmore sat in her living room, staring at her phone. The same phone she had used to call 911. The same phone that could have been the reason Jamal never made it home. Her stomach twisted. She had thought she was being cautious. She had thought she was protecting her neighborhood. But now, she had to ask herself. Protecting it from what? She looked at the screen again. And then, for the first time, she asked herself the question she had spent her whole life avoiding. What if the danger wasn't him? What if it was me? It would be easy for Susan to tell herself that this was just a mistake. A moment of misjudgment. But was it? She had lived in Ridgewood Heights for 15 years. And in all that time, she had never called the police on a teenager walking home. Until tonight. And why? Because he was black. Because she had assumed. Because she had picked up the phone and made a call without stopping to think about what it might cost someone else. She buried her face in her hands. She had thought she was doing the right thing. But in the end, all she had done was put a boy's life in danger. For nothing. Now, ask yourself, how many times has a call like this ended differently? How many stories like Jamal's don't end with a parent showing up just in time? How many people like Susan Whitmore get to walk away without ever thinking about it again? This isn't just a story about one afternoon in one neighborhood. This is a reality that plays out every day. And maybe it's time we stop pretending not to see it. Maybe it's time we do something about it. Because the next time someone like Susan picks up the phone, the person on the other end might not be as lucky. The story of Jamal Carter and the events that unfolded in Ridgewood Heights isn't just an isolated incident. It's a reflection of something much deeper, a harsh reality that countless families face every day. At its core, this story teaches us an uncomfortable but necessary lesson about how fear and assumptions can shape actions in ways we often don't realize, and how those actions can have devastating consequences for others. Fear of the unknown, fear of what we don't understand, can quickly turn into prejudices that influence decisions without any clear evidence. In the case of Susan Whitmore, the well-meaning but misguided call to 911 was based on a gut feeling, an assumption that Jamal, a young black teenager with a gym bag, must be doing something wrong simply because he didn't fit into her image of who should be walking down the street. That decision, however, nearly cost Jamal his safety and well-being, all based on the assumption that he didn't belong in a neighborhood like Ridgewood Heights. What this story makes painfully clear is that assumptions and biases, whether conscious or not, have real-world consequences. In that one moment, Jamal became a suspect, just because of how he looked and where he happened to be. What if the outcome had been different? What if Monica Carter, his mother and the mayor, hadn't been there to intervene? What if the officers hadn't been able to recognize their mistake in time? The truth is, many stories like Jamal's don't end as smoothly or with such a swift resolution. For far too many black teenagers, the simple act of existing in a space where they have every right to be can become a reason to be questioned, harassed, or even detained. The story of Jamal and his mother Monica also brings to light another harsh truth: how different it is when you're someone of authority, someone who carries weight in society. When Monica Carter showed up, the entire dynamic shifted. The officers who were once authoritative and dismissive suddenly had to reckon with the reality of who they were dealing with. This moment of realization begs the question: how many others, without that level of influence or authority, have been treated as criminals simply because of their appearance? The system is built in such a way that people with power often have a different experience with the authorities, but it is critical to understand that this imbalance is not just about a few isolated instances. It is systemic. Every time a black person is wrongfully targeted simply for existing in a particular space, it perpetuates a cycle of injustice. This story challenges us to examine how much we've become complicit in systems that are designed to benefit one group of people while criminalizing another. The question we must ask ourselves is, what would we do differently if we truly understood the weight of our assumptions and the consequences of our actions? This isn't just a matter of changing one individual's behavior, like Susan's, it's about changing the collective mindset. It's about understanding that fear is often the root of bias, and bias leads to harmful actions. What if, instead of fearing someone because they look different or because they're in a neighborhood that doesn't match their identity, we asked ourselves why we feel that way in the first place? What if we took the time to question the root of our fears, and instead of letting them dictate our actions, we allowed our empathy, our understanding of others, and our commitment to fairness to guide us? In the case of Susan Whitmore, the call to 911 was the result of that very fear, a fear of the unknown, a fear that had been built on years of subtle, pervasive societal messages that people of color were more likely to be dangerous. But the reality is, Jamal wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't out to harm anyone. He was simply walking home, the same as anyone else. The problem wasn't Jamal. The problem was the fear and the bias that Susan, along with many others, had learned to internalize over time. The lesson here is that we must confront those biases head-on. We must ask ourselves why we automatically assume the worst of someone based on their appearance or background, and we must actively work to change that mindset, even if it's uncomfortable. The stakes are high, and every time we make an assumption without knowing the whole story, we are playing with lives, real lives that can be affected in ways we don't always see or understand. And yet, there's hope in this story. It doesn't end in violence or tragedy because of Monica's presence, her authority, and her unwavering belief in her son's innocence. But not everyone has that kind of influence. Not everyone is in a position where they can show up and demand that justice be done in the face of police misconduct. That's why we, as a society, need to make sure that everyone has the same protections and rights. It's not enough to wait for the lucky moment when someone has the power to protect you. Everyone deserves that protection, no matter their skin color or their status. The key takeaway is that we can no longer ignore the biases that we hold, the ones we've internalized without even thinking. It's time to stop pretending we don't see the problems, to stop walking away from difficult conversations. We need to face the truth, head on, and commit to doing better. So, the next time you see someone who doesn't look like you, who doesn't fit the image you're used to seeing in certain spaces, take a moment. Pause. Ask yourself, are you acting out of fear, or are you responding with fairness? And if it's fear, why? The story of Jamal Carter and Monica Carter isn't just a story of one family. It's a call to action for all of us to recognize our own biases, to confront our fears, and to commit to creating a society where everyone is truly seen, truly heard, and truly treated equally.